Welcome, everyone, to this Juneteenth Forum on the Future of Inclusion, a gathering in which we will ask, can Black and brown banks compete in a digital economy? My name is Chris Brummer. I'm a professor at Georgetown Law, and on behalf of our Institute of International Economic Law and the Black Economic Alliance, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Visa, for sponsoring the event. As we commemorate Tulsa and Juneteenth, we want to not only look backwards, but forwards, and to challenges facing Black and brown communities in the years ahead. And critical components of that conversation include banks, capital, and technology. In short, people of color have the same right to cutting-edge financial services as anyone else, and the same right to a policy conversation that focuses on their needs. Now, to kick off our dialogue, we will start our conversation on the health of Black and brown America, and I am delighted and honored to have Dr. Cecilia Rouse, the White House Chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. Dr. Rouse, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, let's just jump right into some of the questions just to set the stage. You know, as we exit the worst of the pandemic, what does the economic health of Black and brown America look like? And really, how has it evolved? And what metrics do you, as the country's chief economist, use?
Yes, thank you. It's such an important question. So I think in order to understand where we are currently, we have to go back to last spring and put it all into context. So, last spring, the pandemic hit very suddenly. If we go back to April, we can see that the unemployment rates for Black and Latino workers reached 17 and 19% respectively. And that compares to, I'm going to say just 14% for white workers. This was, the economy just, I guess, spiked down as the pandemic spiked up, and we all went into a defensive crouch. We know over the course of the year, the Black and Latino workers have suffered some of the greatest declines in labor force participation. And we know that as our economy has been coming back, there's been a slow, it's picked up a lot of speed, but as it's been coming back, that the return to work has been slower for Black workers, for Latino workers. And so that right now, their rates of long-term unemployment, which we defined as being out of work for 6 or more months, are among the highest. So we know that the economic health of Black and workers of color is worse than compared to whites. But importantly, the economic health of all Americans is improving. This is in no small measure to the American Rescue Plan, which importantly, from my perspective, funded this really effective rollout of the vaccinations. Look, let's face it, these vaccines have been much more effective than I'm not a doctor, but I anticipated back in January, right? They have been more effective against the variants, they reduce transmissibility, and with the American Rescue Plan, we were able to fund the really effective rollout, so we got shots into arms. That has spurred tremendous economic growth over the first quarter, so that we are leading the world in terms of our economic recovery. So we're all doing better. Are we all doing equally better? No. So if we look at the May unemployment report, we saw that the unemployment rates for Blacks and Latinos were 9.1% and 7.3% respectively, whereas that for white workers was 5.1%. So we're gaining ground and we're going to get to the other side, but the recovery has been somewhat unequal. If I can make one last point, and that is to say that this administration has put forward, so President Biden has put forward 2 big packages, the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. And I just want to emphasize that those plans were designed post-pandemic. The American Rescue Plan was to get us to the other side. Those plans are actually designed to deal with these long-standing inequities that were laid bare by the pandemic. It's meant to ensure that we've got the innovation and investments that we need to address climate change and refill and infrastructure and all that. But importantly, it's also meant to be leveling the playing field so that as we increase our economic growth, all of our communities are able to participate. So I think it's a point that's often lost, but the whole point, that's what the Build Back Better part is. The better part is to ensure that prosperity is equally shared.
Well, during the pandemic, obviously one critical component or development during the year was the digitalization of the economy, right? And that can have spillovers for workers and for services and provision of services and the like. I mean, we've really just had this massive acceleration in which, on the other side of the pandemic, we're all living very much in a digital economy. What has been, from your perspective, the impact, given that those data that you shared with us? What has digitalization done when it comes to jobs and access to opportunity, both from a racial standpoint, but also from a larger societal standpoint? And how should we, as we spend the next 2 hours, sort of as we think about banks, how should we contextualize this digitalization in terms of the larger operation of many of the choices that you and others are making in the White House?
Okay, small question, Chris, but let me make it right. This pandemic has really accelerated our reliance on digitization on the internet. So one piece that's so important in our efforts is improving broadband access to all Americans, because we saw that impacted workers, impact schooling. If kids didn't have access to internet, reliable internet, they were going to get locked out, and that has implications for our future growth. One aspect, so you guys are going to be talking about banking, and so fintech obviously is going to feature prominently in your discussions. One part that I think I might highlight is the impact on workers' access to jobs. And so one aspect that we have seen is that Latino workers and Black workers, we don't have a lot of data on this, but we do believe that they're disproportionately represented in this contingent workforce, sort of this gig workforce that is really was born out of this digitization of our economy. So we don't know if all of them are gig workers, but we do see that Black workers are overrepresented in what we're going to call electronically mediated workforces. So it raises many issues. I'm not going to get very far on this, and we can have a whole conference on this. And I think there's both pros and cons. On the one hand, we know that many of these workers don't have the most secure jobs. So the jobs aren't particularly secure. They're not particularly well compensated, especially when you look at things like health insurance, paid leave, retirement, and so they're precarious. They're not covered typically by our UI system, our unemployment insurance system. That was one of the things that our pandemic unemployment insurance systems did allow them to participate in, which gave them a level of security that otherwise they don't have. It can be tricky. How do you define someone who's self-employed as whether they're choosing not to work or can't work for economic conditions? But our unemployment insurance system has not evolved to accommodate these workers. On the other hand, gig work does provide a kind of insurance for workers. So what we can see is, it offers those who are working in the gig economy more control over their hours. It allows them, if they lose a job or have a reduction in hours in their main job, it allows them to fill in on the other side. And research has shown that after ride sharing is introduced into an area, the spending is much less sensitive to volatility in primary income which improves the welfare of those rideshare workers because they're able to fill in and compensate for when they have decreases elsewhere. So it's a mixed bag. I think this is really the adaptation of our time, is this adaptation to this new form of work.
Well, Dr. Rouse, thank you so very much for this conversation. We're going to have you back for a very long, hopefully half-hour discussion later on in the fall. But, we just wanted to set the stage with where we are right now. Obviously, the gigification and the digitalization of the economy are enormous, and they're having an enormous impact. And so now we're about to switch over and talk about minority banks and their place in this confluence of transformation. But it's been the perfect place setting. And thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. And this is a really important topic. And so thank you for holding the discussion.
Thank you.